Anyway, so I guess for the main part of the show here, to not to drag on too long, we're talking again about I guess design theory of why Drew and I maybe pick the cubes we play or pick the cubes we built for size reason, card legality reasons, whatever it is, card choices, uh, you know, all the kind of nitty gritty stuff that kind of ended up made us land kind of where we are, and kind of influences that affected our decisions, and then maybe talk about if we have time to talk about other cubes that we've experienced, and feedback from that. So I'll let you start us off, Drew.
I guess I can way back. I think we're talking 2010, so I don't know. I could that could be way back. Uh, when I first started my list, we didn't have any ones cubes in the entire city, which is traditional cube ones cube.
Yeah, I guess to preface that, to talk about that very briefly,
Yeah,
before the cube that exists that we I guess a cube exists that we have now, where it's this draft in a box where how people draft and you play people. Uh, Cube was introduced into Winnipeg as a multiplayer variant. So you drafted this cube with four, and then you played 2v2 a la two headed giant. Unlike two headed giant, where you sit beside your teammate and you take your turns at the same time, you sat across from your teammate, and then it kind of went A B, and then you took turns that way, and then you would attack individually, block individually. You had a combined life total. That's pretty much the team aspect of it. So if my teammate couldn't
25
block,
life total.
I
So
did
it's very
25.
fast format.
Because my teammate couldn't block, I would still the team would lose life. So because teammate can't block, and there's the dynamics of multiplayer. It's very easy to be able to kind of attack for a team to attack one way. Games ended up being very fast, so we upped the life totals from 20 to 25, and that's the cube we played for years before traditional cubes existed, and that's where Drew started.
Yeah, and so I started on my ones regular cube list, and I was in basically a Google spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, and there was basically no resources available. MTG Salvation was a
Salvation
thing.
was the only thing.
Yeah, and there was a couple names that people would recognize. The bigger names were present at that time, but I kind of just started with writing the Titans across on the 6 CMC level and fleshed it out from there. And I have my same spreadsheet. It goes back all the way to 2010, every cut and edition that I've made, and the curve has overall stayed the same. The
Really, that's kind of
Yeah,
impressive to be honest.
you can got yeah. It's because it's quicker because back then you didn't have as many one drops available in red and
Yeah,
white and elves. So
features are just more efficient too.
exactly, it's
Yeah.
gotten tighter and condensed to lower CMC, but overall the vision is the same. I originally started powered because we played other formats where we liked playing with power at that point, and eventually, I guess as feedback and stuff that I've noticed that people don't like getting blown out with Soul Ring and Black Lotus and whatever. So I think traditionally a lot of cube designers start out powered, and then after a while they're like, okay, I've got my fill of that. Let's depower and let's go for more interesting games and like better matches overall and less swingy. And so I ended up cutting power. I cut stuff like balance, Soul Ring.
Okay, so
Uh,
when you cut all those cards,
yep.
it'd been you had your cube together for a while at that point, right? I
Yeah,
guess you cut.
I could pinpoint it exactly because of the spreadsheet, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna say it's 2013 maybe.
So when you cut just power before any of the. So you kept the fast mana around post power for a bit.
Some of the fast mana, yes. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I went power, balance, mind twist. I kept the tinker package. I kept sneak attack. I
So
kept
like
grim
Grim
monolith.
Monolith, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt.
I pretty sure I cut mana crypt and soul ring, but
I
I
remember
had
Mana Crypt getting cut early, but you kept
yeah
Chromox, Mox Diamond.
yeah Chromox box diamond I cut like 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah.
or I guess whenever the Trilands came out. So there it still exists a little bit. I think I might have one or actually no, that might have been the last bit of fast mana. Yeah, that makes sense. And originally, I guess I lost my train of thought there. Let's think here. Right. I had Tinker and Sneak Attack for a while, but losing the fast mana meant that those cards were depowered, so they lasted another 2 years, and then those got removed. And because the curve was lowering overall, I ended up cutting Armageddon because everyone understands Armageddon's a powerful card. But once everyone's starting to play creatures or fast responses to creatures, your window for Armageddon gets narrower and narrower. So I remember the last time I cast Armageddon, it was like I had 3 guys on board, and my opponent had nothing and a mana rock, and he killed 2 of my relevant guys, and I had a bear. And then he he recovered faster than I did. And I was like, this is happening way too often.
Right.
So, and Planeswalkers have kind of taken over that role as they've been printed for another
Planeswalkers are pretty good
dynamic.
against Armageddons.
Yeah, and so I guess my list now is I chose 540 because we play with 6 people, and I use half the cube. When I started, we are playing a lot of loose ones. We're still playing a couple loose ones, but now in Modern Magic, especially with the power standard cards, they are printing so many good cards that I can start to include the ones that I think fit the environment and exclude the ones either that will people will hate playing against or too powerful or stuff like a True Name Nemesis. That was a contentious card when it came out. Like
Mhm.
no one's gonna have fun playing against that, so I don't have to play these types of things if I don't want to, because it's not about power level, it's about the environment and your play group.
Yeah, it's about having fun.
Yeah.
So when Planeswalkers came out, did you? I guess you don't have to put an immediate cap because when they came out in Lorwyn, they weren't oppressive like I guess modern age Planeswalkers were.
Well, there were still auto includes. I remember everyone included all 5. Well, everyone was building a regular traditional list, which was almost everybody, because most people didn't build in special lists or set lists. Everyone on the Salvation realm was creating the list, and everyone had their own splinter of it. So everyone had a kind of a goal. Cube had a definition. Nowadays, cube can mean a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's an interesting point you
yeah,
bring up. I know, again, when we talk about Cube originally in Winnipeg, was this 2v2 multiplayer format, and then eventually when traditional Cube, which we called ones forever, just because
still call ones.
it was so ingrained in the Winnipeg mindset that the traditional Cube was twos. So once eventually that became it took a long time too for that to kind of becoming the regular cube. Like I remember I was the first person in Fusion to build a traditional 1v1 cube. I remember that I just hard switched one day from 2v2 to 1v1, and slowly but surely that ended up becoming the more popular version, but there's still a lot of especially the Fusion old heads, you know, who stopped playing Magic 5 years ago, who just kind of play Magic for fun. uh, the more spikier players who the 2v2 cube format is still like the Magic they play. That's still the Magic they play. That's the Magic they've been playing for 5 years. But now cube is in such especially in the modern world we live in with the internet and so many resources. There are a million different ways. Maybe not a million. A lot of different ways to play cube with different rules or restrictions or uh, you know I guess mostly restrictions. A lot, some people build
There's
draft.
customizations,
Yeah, a lot of it's like not everyone builds a cube. Some people just replicate a draft format. Like I like Innistrad, so my Innistrad cube has one of every rare and mythic and two uncommon and three, and then we seed packs, and then I play in Commander cube, and then I can do it so many different ways.
yeah.
Uh, so now there's so many different ways to play cube. So that part's super interesting. But yeah, for me, I like I'm trying to think. It was is when I built my first cube because it was
I
super
want to
super
say it was
early.
like 2 years after mine, maybe a bit less than that.
No, so my first cube in
Oh,
general.
first one, the two's cube.
I think it was 2006. 1 second.
Yeah, I think we've been cubing since 2006,
I think it's really bright when I open
7.
a new Windows tab here. I have an actually. I'll link this article in the show notes. But I used to write articles for the Matabase. I used to write them before making videos. see if I can find it. And anyway, I did an entire article on how I got into Cube. I did something similar to this, not necessarily design philosophy, but kind of my introduction in general to Cube. Oh yeah, here we go. And 2000. So I was introduced to it in 2006. So it's been a bit. It's been a couple of years, and that's when again we were introduced to. I was introduced to the 2v2 format, and it kind of took Fusion by, I don't want to say by storm, because for many years, Cube was kind of this, was only played by the elites. It was only like the super spikes, like the store owner of Fusion Gaming when it first opened built one. That was back when like everything was like foiled Japanese, because that was like the super high end stuff at the time. And I remember like watching them play, and you had to like kind of prove yourself to kind of be allowed into this group, because not just anybody play in this group. So you kind of had to like sit on the bench for however long, and then watch these cubes for however long, until eventually one day they're like, "Hey, we need a guy. You're in." They finally draft you in, and it's nice. And
Yeah, we only got 3, and we'll take the least plebeiest of you, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So eventually, I was cool enough to be in this group, and I was like, right away, I was like, "This is the sickest thing." So Cube was introduced to me then, and was kind of that. It directly affected my design philosophy for many years, as Cube was just the best cards. Stop. Like, that's it. It was the Masticores, the Psychotogs, all of those cards that were the best of the best at the time. Were just made up a cube. Size didn't matter. You just built whatever, and you played with your friends. And because it was this like this two-headed giant format, it was trying to find cards that were specifically good, or who could abuse that. So cards like
opponents, Tyrant's Choice.
Like, yeah, there are lots of cards to do it now. But back then, it's like the card Firestorm was the card. It's like 1 red instant, discard X cards, deal X damage to X targets. So I can just like play it, discard 5, 10 my opponents, kill 3 other guys. The game's probably over.
Yeah, it's probably good enough to let your teammate finish them off.
Yeah, like earthquake effects, like so that meta format became a little inbred, just because of the 2v2 nature of it, and that's still I don't want to say popular format in Winnipeg, but again, the same store owner with the same cube still exists. It's been updated over the course of time. Then a very, very close friend of mine who I play Magic with and travel with frequently enough also still has a 2v2 cube. So then that was the cube I played for a long time. And I'm trying to think of when I switched. Actually, I have it in this. Oops. I have it in this article somewhere. But that was it. Like, I guess the driving factor for me playing Magic for a very, very long time had nothing to do with actually playing in events. It was traveling to events to buy cool shit.
Yep.
It was finding foil, foreign, alternate art, like OG, because like that. There was also like you get all the OG stuff. You don't shortcut. You don't get F&M promos, right? You don't get that cheap stuff. You just get the OG premium stuff, maybe alternate language, signed, altered, all that kind of stuff. And I remember like I still have pictures. So in the same article, which will be in the show notes, of us all the cool stuff I used to own. A lot of Eustas. And I think even now, if you had went back and convinced me, like, because in one of these pictures I bought a workshop, just kind of for no reason, because I kind of wanted a workshop because it wasn't infinity dollars. And if you had told me back then, like, yeah, Aaron, by the way, like, hey, nudge, nudge, like, Underground Sea is going to be
don't sell these
800 CAD, and Lotus, like, when I started playing Magic in 2000, Scourge, like when I started playing a lot, this Alpha Lotus that's only $700 is going to be 5 digits. Like, no, there's literally no chance I'm going to believe you. So I one thing I hate, especially for players who's playing as long as I have, or like, oh, I wish I had held on to all this stuff, or blah blah blah. But like, again, like, let's be real here. If future Aaron comes back and says like, hey, past Aaron, Black Lotus is going to be 5 digits. You should probably buy some and sit on some. Like, there's no chance. The card's already 10 years old. It's only like $700. What are the odds? No way. Anyway. So for years, again, that's what I played. And it was the reason why I went to events. It was my favorite thing about it. But eventually this like 1v1 format starts to exist, and the problem with twos is if you're like really specific or you're kind of OCD about like things balancing and stuff like that, twos is Magic is not designed like that. You know what I mean? So twos was a nightmare. White was bad, like and stop. That was just the end. White is terrible. Blue's the best. You know, balancing it was a nightmare because it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, you can play like 40 white cards and 90 blue cards.
Yeah, very easily because again, white was really bad. So, yeah, okay. So let's say in 2009, 2010, after playing twos for how many years, I switched. I kind of just like again, like switched from twos to ones, kind of overnight, and a lot of the same philosophy I had with twos transferred to ones of like just playing the best cards, and unfortunately, and something I'll admit early in that time was like my cube was really gatekeepy, like having a lot of foreign language stuff was perceived as, well, if you don't know what these cards do, I don't want to bother cubing. You know what I mean? Like if you don't know kind of the entire list of all these the best of the best, it's not worth my time. I know it's like a really asshole thing, and it was definitely like an elitist attitude that was carried over from how I was introduced in the cube, and that kind of didn't go away for a bit, admittedly, but eventually cube was just my favorite thing to do all the time, and when you're trying to get more and more people into it, having to explain to them what half your cube does isn't really great. And not everyone's been playing Magic as long as you or I have, and it's something you can't just assume. So eventually, I fell out of that pretty hard. I remember when Modern Masters 1 got announced. When was that? Modern Masters 1?
I know I drafted that twice.
It's like 2013 or 2014. 13. When Modern Masters 1 was announced, I thought the sky was falling and sold a lot of my cards. Mostly my high end. Because, when they announced stuff like Tarmogoyf's in it, Tar Confidence in it, all this other stuff, and you're like, holy crap, this stuff's never been printed before, ever. So, I guess there was a world when Master Sets didn't exist in 2013. Where Magic felt like a safer investment, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're printing the best cards. And we're going to do it every year. Like, okay, sell everything, baby. Buy, So I sold a lot of my high end. Made my cube non-foil, and it's kind of been non-foil since. But, that isn't that relevant. I just like that part of the story.
I do envy that it's not foil. It makes it easier to change things and acquire cards.
Yeah, that's actually going to be something that I'm going to bring up. So I'm not really talking. So I guess this really long story just explains that I was kind of I don't want to say pigeonholed, but put in this philosophy that I played the best of the best archetypes. Synergy didn't matter. I just played the best cards, and I only played with elite assholes. That was kind of how I cubed for many years. Eventually, from playing ones, you could balance it. It's really easy to balance. But then the more I played Magic, the longer I played Magic 4, the longer I curated a list for, the more I started appreciating, the synergistic stuff, the stuff that work together, the archetypes, that kind of stuff. And as the community started growing, and on Reddit, it was like just after Modern Masters. I think it was in 2014-ish.
I've been using Reddit for over 7 years, so 8 almost now.
Yeah, so that's when the Cube subreddit started like slowly picking up, I think, and I'd get more feedback, and other people in the city would start building them, and I'd start having these conversations with the other people, and there was like other people again, different design theory, different whatever, different play groups, this and that, and I remember not long after is when Austin and I, the first person I started doing this stuff with, started recording this kind of content, because Cube is my favorite way to play Magic. I think it'll forever be my favorite way to play Magic. I think it's like a fine wine. The longer you play Magic, the more you appreciate it. The like cards throughout history, which are mostly being taken over by standard cards. But again, my philosophy changed a bit. So I think at the end of the day, I still want to play the best of the best. Asterisks. So, like Drew mentioned, you cut a lot of cards for fun reasons. So, for a very long time, my cube was, I guess, Legacy Plus. So, similar to Drew, why I got Power. Power is super fun. And when I was drafting a lot, especially when I was drafting twos, where I'm drafting multiple times a night, all weekend, You have these big, swingy, awesome games of Magic, a lot of big stories. That was everything I wanted it to be. But as that train slowed down, you cube less often. And again, those stories are fun and doing that stuff is sweet. But, when you only can cube once a week, once a month, and you manage to, like, especially more as an adult, my early 20s is pretty easy, but later, uh, finding a bunch of, adults to find time to get together and play this and kind of commit 3-4 hours to kind of get these blowouts kind of over and over on the back of cards like Power, it left a pretty bad taste in people's mouths. So that was when I decided to make to cut Power, and by cutting Power, I kind of messed around with the non-power artifacts for a while, but then eventually, actually not even that long ago, I decided to settle on just Legacy. Uh, Legacy, I
Legacy
was
ban list.
yes. So after Moto started introducing their cubes, I I like the idea of a lot of just having the least amount of barriers to get somebody new in, and if all I have to do is say my cube is legacy follows the legacy ban list, it was the easiest way for people to kind of immediately have an idea of what to expect. No fast mana, no power, but like we're playing, uh, on the survival, recurring nightmare, whatever, sneak attacks, show and tell, maybe storm level of things. Though I guess storm's pretty bad without fast mana. Uh, and it's eventually the similar reason why I eventually switched to modern. But I was on legacy for a very long time because it kind of put me in a spot where I got rid of a lot of the cards I don't like playing against, or that people didn't like playing against, like power, fast mana, mind twist, balance, stuff like that. But it still left me in a world where I could play uh Tinker's Band.
Yes, Cradle.
Yeah, you play Cradle, you play Upheaval. You still play enough like a recurring nightmare. Enough old cards that it still felt very powerful, and that's what I did for a while. So then, uh,
And you went for 450, right?
yeah, so my cube's 450. Similar to Drew, the reason why I chose 450 is because I draft over half. I draft 100 or 270 cards out of 450. So it's a large enough percent that if let's say I want to support specific strategies, with that number, I'm happy to kind of guarantee a certain amount of any percentage of a strategy will show up. And that's kind of the reason why I have tried messing at 360 and at 540. 360, you just get, it's not fun. And when I say fun, I mean it's less fun from a design side. Again, if
You have to play a certain amount of effects, and you don't get any new cards, right?
yeah. So at 450, I thought was a really good sweet spot, especially when I started building it. Of new cards come out, and I have enough flex space that I can try out these new cards. But like Drew said, when he first started building his cube at 540, at 450 now, that's getting less and less true. Obviously, it doesn't really matter. I can play whatever cards I want, but to just ignore the obviously good cards isn't also the answer. So again, still trying to stick to we're still playing the best cards, but we're trying to also build archetypes and strategy. Uh, the my wiggle room shrinks over time because cards get better. That makes sense. Okay, where was I going with this? So again, I stuck with Legacy for a long time, and then again, there's a lot of like, okay, what about True Name Nemesis? What about Upheaval? I'm like, well, I guess I just play them because they're Legacy legal, and I don't want to be Legacy asterisks, if that makes sense. And I don't know why. It's mostly just a restriction I put on myself. There's a really good reason for that, but
Honestly, like some people, a lot of people, including myself, need some type of restriction because it gives you guidelines, right? It's like a ruler, and if you don't have a ruler, you can't draw a straight line very well, right?
right. And like I guess just choosing Legacy, um, is arbitrary. Like obviously, my Highlander cube draft format isn't designed to that these legacy cards are better than are too good for that specific format. I'm sure there are a ton that are fine. I just chose a ban list because it arbitrarily it was just easier to get people. I feel to get people like this is what I'm doing. This is the cube I'm playing. It's easy to kind of understand right away. And eventually, a lot of my cube became like ease of access, so people knew kind of immediately what to expect. They could read all the cards, no, not being foreign. And it was easy to get players, and that's kind of what it turned into. Was I wanted to be Understandable. I don't want people to be confused. Having it'd be like if I didn't support Storm and had brain freeze in for no reason. I don't want any of that kind of stuff. I want it to be as to fit in as easy as possible. So I played Legacy for a while, and it was kind of a way to differentiate between Drew's and I's list because without it, it was very very similar. But they ended up, our list ended up being very similar regardless. So not long ago, I switched to Modern to kind of like have a pretty drastic difference between Drew's and I. And Modern is at a powerful enough place, especially now, that you have obvious omissions. Like, I guess at Legacy, Storm's already dead. You get Sneak Attack, Show and Tell, but you still have Reanimator. But other than that, like, there's nothing too kind of outside the box. Like, I guess you can have the Artifact deck. I guess is another thing that you can make better in Legacy. But in Modern, Reanimator dies. You have nothing. You have almost nothing for Reanimator that isn't 4 or 5 mana to reanimate something. Getting cards in the graveyard are just like compulsive research, Merfolk Looter effects, and without Reanimator, without the supporting cast of Sneak Attack and Show and Tell, I think is very very weak. Just a hard Reanimator deck, I very rarely think is actually good. You need the kind of the backup plan of again Show and Tell or Sneak Attack or Oath of Druids or Eureka, something like that.
You need another dimension.
Sure, yeah, you can't just be this hard one. So yeah, Reanimator went out the window, but outside of that, everything was fine. There was still aggro control mid range. Cards are powerful enough. You didn't think you're sacrificing much. The mana base gets a little worse because you lose ABU duels, but that's other lands are strong enough now that isn't that big a deal, and you can fix that too by shrinking your cube size if you want. But it didn't come up that often. But I was overall I was pretty happy with it. Originally just an experiment. Ended up being pretty happy with. So that was the cube I've had most recently up until I've had Pauper. But I enjoyed it quite a bit. So I guess design choices that I guess Drew and I have both kind of settled on. There's a couple I want to talk about quickly. So the Planeswalker restriction. This is like for some reason, I don't want to say a hot button issue, but people get heated about it for some reason. I think a lot of the cube community, unfortunately, when we talk about specific things like Planeswalkers, instead of people talking about this is how I build my cube, this is what my playgroup thinks, blah blah blah. I think people are always trying to convey it or take it as this is the way I do it and this is the right way to do it, and that isn't the case at all. Drew and I have kind of this arbitrary, I don't say arbitrary, but this Planeswalker restriction because both of us have experienced if you kind of let loose, Planeswalkers become this center of attention. The
there is sub game. Like we both have been cubing since Lorwyn when they came out.
Mm-hmm.
So we started from the ground floor, like everyone had the 5 because there's only 5, and then they kept printing more. So we kept adding them as they kept getting printed, and they were good enough. And then you start hitting limits where you feel comfortable of how your cube is progressing, and it's everyone's own personal feelings and design intentions on where that level is. It's just like we've hit that realization a long time ago, so we've already settled in our little makeshift camp. And like if you want to play Planeswalkers, there's nothing like stopping you. But you're not going to sway me. I've made up my mind. I'm happy with where I am, I guess.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, whatever I guess design philosophy I stick to, you stick to, whoever sticks to, people just need to take that as like, hey, that's just how we do it. That's how our playgroup likes it. I'm not saying that this is the best way to do it. There is literally no de facto best way to cube. It doesn't exist.
Well, like you, I guess, similar to your talk earlier, like I used to be like, this is what cube is as a definition. It is where some of the better cards. It's supposed to be singleton. It's you're supposed to play even colors, and like I don't care anymore. Like I think maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, I was like, why this doesn't make any sense. You guys can do what you want. Like, well, who am I to say?
So like I was a stick in the mud when Cube kind of became much more popular. Admittedly, when people are like, I'm building set cubes, or I'm breaking the one of restriction, or whatever the case may be. At first I was like, oh, why would you do that? That's so stupid. That's not what cube is. But then you quickly realize, you catch yourself like, why do I care? Like, what does it matter to me how other people enjoy cubing? At the end of the day, people can do whatever they want. Obviously, it doesn't affect me, but honestly, like, I'm just, if people do whatever they want to have fun, and the playgroup likes it, like, all the power to them.
See,
Um,
but to differentiate myself and to help grow the community and maybe design overall, back on Reddit 5 years ago or whatever, it's linked in the sidebar, but I wrote some unpopular opinions.
mhm.
And those were the more you're doing things wrong type of articles. And they were worded like that on purpose to generate discussion, not because I'm saying you're wrong. It's like, here's something to think about. And they were good for the time, but I would not write those types of articles now, even though I get asked sometimes to do more. It's just not the type of environment anymore for it.
I think those kind of topics are still good. Maybe, and maybe coming at a different angle, but one of the things. So Cube, as much as I like Cube, and we all obviously like Cube, it is a fairly niche community. It's kind. I don't want to say inbred, but Cube Tutor, Cube Cobra that show analytics of like top X, whatever, most popular average card, this and that. Uh, I would imagine not nearly as many people. Guess I don't want to say care about it as much as you and I, but like maybe think about it, go as deep as, haven't doing it as long as, to make changes as frequently, to try new stuff out, or not be afraid to try new stuff out, and just kind of make changes in and out. I know between you and I, there's a pretty big difference, and I think you mentioned it earlier, foils. I know when my cube was nice, was all foil and stuff, and I remember specifically I day two to GP, and I celebrated because I don't know why I was so excited. I bought a SDCC Jace Memory Adept, which is the 5 mana mill Jace.
Is that the one I have?
Probably. So that card was a big point of contention for a long time, and I remember after I bought it and people started talking and ragging on it, and I knew that card again creates this kind of it kind of creates a sub game that if you just don't deal with fast enough, the game's over and it's not super fun. I knew that was the case, but I just refused to want to cut it because I'd obviously spent a bunch of money on it. It meant something to me, so I just kept it around forever for that reason. And now that my cube isn't foil, I don't care what anything. Especially being in modern and cards aren't that expensive. I have no ties to anything. I'll cut anything. You know what I mean? I'll cut and try whatever. It doesn't matter. And that's
Yeah,
something that
you're way more easier to cut things than I am. Although I like
Oh
to
yeah.
think I'm more ahead of the curve and trying out things than a lot of people are. I wish that I didn't have as many old foils that I did that are foreign. I still got like 30 of them. And they're too expensive to get the English original versions of them. So
Mm.
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, I
Personal
know
nightmare.
you make a lot of safe changes. You make changes a lot. Again, you make a lot of changes. They are fairly relatively safe. To kind of insulate yourself from having to have just like
Buy
have
cards that I
burn
can't.
money,
Yeah,
cards you're
exactly.
not going to use. So
My first wave of changes when a set comes out are cards I'm confident in.
yeah,
And then like 2 weeks later I'll have another couple of, okay, these turned out to be okay for my initial impressions, and then later I'll have like something else that, okay, you said this has performed well for you, that kind of thing, and I'll
yeah.
slide them in.
So obviously, if your Q budget is like 1x or 1.5x or 2x, the cards I'm buying, you're obviously going to be more hesitant to make as many changes. And again, that's something that I like doing a lot, and especially to kind of have these kind of conversations and just have more input on just different cards. I'm sure I tried more cards than if I wasn't doing this kind of stuff. I'd be trying just for the sake of being able to talk about it. And playing non foils and just having again no attachment to anything makes it a lot easier. I guarantee there's no person you can talk to who can tell you honestly that the fact that the cube is full doesn't affect changes they make. Like cutting cards, if that makes sense. Because there's no way. I've been on both sides. There's no way you can do it. You spend so much money, especially again all these fulls that I went and hunted on all these GPs years ago, that I would be super hard pressed to cut because a lot of those things meant something, and a lot of times, cube is like a trophy case of like all the cards that I had acquired or like bought over the course of years, and it was something that I could show off to like, yeah, this is like all the cool stuff I own. So yeah, it would be super hard to convince me otherwise to kind of make certain cuts. But again, not having uh, any attachment to anything now is great. Big fan. But I guess I will talk about Jace. Jace Memory Depth is a good example. Jace, I think it's kind of sad the three examples I have. Okay, let's say 3.5 are happen to be all planeswalkers. But Jace Memory Depths, Ashiok Nightmare Muse, Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner.
The second 4-mana one,
No, the first one.
the first one,
Is this Kiora
Crasher of Waves?
Crash Waves? Okay, Kiora Crash Waves. Jesus, so bright. Kiora Crasher Waves. All three of these planeswalkers. I don't even want to use them as this isn't for the planeswalker argument. This is for cards again similar to Mind Twist, similar to Upheaval. I guess there we go. Here's a couple more examples.
I can give you some Anka Mishra and Winter Orb.
Sure. So these kind of cards that all exist that change how the game's played completely. All three of those planeswalkers, some a little more than others, does require an immediate action, or you will lose the game. You could argue that if a questing beast is in play for 3-4 turns, you would also lose the game. But these planeswalkers and like again Anka Mishra, Armageddon, whatever, Upheaval, they just change how the game is played entirely. They require you to kind of like play at a different axis. They interact with the game differently than most cards do, and they generally create at least from our experience, for both Drew and I, fairly unfun game states. So maybe another card like Moat is another card that does that.
Yep.
And these are the kind of cards that historically that Drew and I have both kind of unanimously cut. And that is generally from feedback from our player base. I know Drew and I are fairly fortunate. I see a lot of, I guess, topic of this on the Cube subreddit of like just trying to get feedback from your player base, like earnest feedback. And all the people we play with, we've been friends with for a relatively long amount of time. So getting feedback is easy. It's a breeze. No problem. People don't like the X, they tell us about it right away. So we're able
sometimes during the game.
Sometimes during the game. So we're able to kind of make these decisions, individually, as a group. A lot of people just, I don't like playing against cards XYZ. And you know what? At the end of the day, even if at the end of the day, I love Ashio. I love that card. And everyone else hates playing against it. I need the other 5 people, 5, 7, however many people to like cubing just as much as I do. Without them, I can't cube. You know what I mean? So making those kind of decisions, I think, is better overall for your group. And again, this isn't. You don't have to use these cards specifically as a reference. That is, I guess, a reason why Drew and I specifically didn't play those cards for a very long time, and continue not to play, because I actually have Nightmare Muse and Jace. It's hard to. You can't say those cards are bad. The cards are very good. Like I don't blame why everyone plays 3-mana Ashiok. The card is oppressively good. At the right time, and I'm never going to be the kind of person to tell you not to play them. I don't find them fun. You shouldn't play them. That's a terrible angle. But at the same time, if you get feedback about any particular card, let's say your playgroup hates swords. They really, really hate all the swords of X and Y, which comes up periodically.
Probably the protections.
Yeah, all your Sword of Feast and Famine's protection from my entire deck. Cool. And that's going to happen every now and then with protection. But, it could be of literally any topic. If you're getting feedback from your player base, hopefully they're giving it to you, and try not to just assume they're being salty about it or being mad about it. Especially if you get recurring feedback. At the end of the day, it is your cube. You can do whatever you want with it. But again, I think you have to consider the other however many people you're trying to play with. Just because you like something doesn't mean that it's gonna go over super well. What else? I don't think of what else has come up recently. Well, yeah, I guess like for traditional cube standards, Drew and I, like I said, historically, I've kind of just picked a ban list and rolled with that. And even like my current cube that I have right now, which is Pauper, is just the Pauper ban list for the sake of ease, if that makes sense. And
explaining it to people, yeah.
Yeah, if someone wants to cube with me, what kind of cube, especially in a world now where, like we said, there's so many different cubes. There's so many different cubes that are experienced on Moto. Having the least amount of friction getting somebody in is kind of the model I've started to lean towards. Uh, and Drew, I guess you're at. I described it as Legacy Plus, but it's not really accurate.
I couldn't even tell you what is banned in Legacy and Vintage. So, I just
So
play what I think is good for my environment. So,
yep. So I guess I don't. I never refer to it as Vintage because Vintage doesn't have power, or Vintage has power. So Legacy-ish is probably a close assessment. It plays pretty close to the Legacy ban list, especially now that you've cut a lot of fast mana. But still, fairly wishy washy. Um,
I updated my battle box recently and cut the only 2 rares because Sarah Sphinx was downgraded. So now I can call my battle box Popper or,
Peasant.
or Peasant.
Why'd you cut the Hypnotic Sprite?
The which one?
Hypnotic Sprite?
Yeah,
Hypnotic
because it's a
Sprite.
rare. Now I can easily explain it. It fits in this category, right?
It's common, uncommon, battle box. What's battle box? Oh, let me tell you what battle box.
We want to get a niche format into a niche format. There you go.
Yeah, so it's like niche formatception. Trying to think if there's anything else that I'm missing. I feel like I kind of just talked about the history both you and I have about Cube and kind of why we, which I guess affects how we settled on what we have now. Um, but try to be more specific. Uh, I think at the end of the day, you and I obviously want what's best for a play group as long as everyone's enjoying themselves, having a good time. Again, we were very fortunate to get very good feedback from all of our player base. But we just want everyone to have the best experience, and we don't. Neither of us adhere to having I need X this, I need this many removal spells and this many creatures and this many of this and this many of this. You kind of just pull some levers, change some numbers, and then settle on something that you end up liking. Uh,
Benefit from building the list from a ground up in a spreadsheet is I've already tweaked all those numbers over the years. Like I draft black, and over the last year, I felt just personally that I want another Doomblade. So we just add one in the next time it's printed. It's
yeah,
there's no mathematical analysis that I have for my list. It's all just over time.
I guess one thing we should talk about briefly, and that's something that gets brought up a lot in the Cube subreddit, and that's the importance of aggressive decks or aggro. I think you especially, you and I are very what's the word? We've talked about it a lot.
Well, I haven't edited my tagline for my cube in a long time. I just imported it to Cube Cobra from Cube Tutor, and I think I copied the same thing. And I says like it's one of the most aggro lists around. I'm not sure that is fully accurate anymore because of the new design, some of the new niche design philosophies that are out.
Mhm.
But aggro is it's still true to my description. It's probably favored to win 55% of the matchups just because aggro is over time was just keep running card. It's become very consistent. So I have as many 1-drops as I expect the deck to get, and it'll have like 4 to 6, and it'll always roll out pretty well. And it's usually good to beat a medium rollout in a lot of other decks. So it's strong.
Yeah, so having a good aggro deck, I think, is really important to keep the other decks in check. So your cube doesn't end up kind of like for our cubes, you don't end up kind of like the mid range decks kind of running amok. Without those decks or the control decks, kind of being again put in check with the Goblin Guide decks, that kind of your cube kind of I don't want to say devolves into battle cruiser magic fast, but that ends up being one of the best strategies is kind of these mid range balls. Because again,
Like
cube is a
yeah,
bunch of good cards.
the old theory is the aggro decks should be one of the best decks, and if they're not, then the next best thing is to go bigger than your opponent, and then it can get into those problems, right?
Mhm. Yeah, that's probably a good way to look at it. Uh, so yeah, aggro is obviously very very important. It's something that both of us have to be make sure the deck is good. It's not the fun answer. It's not the most enjoyable answer, but it is an important part of cube. And again, people don't have to draft it. Sometimes it happens. No one's on that deck, but I think it has to exist. The threat of it has to exist to kind of keep the balance.
I guess when you're drafting your list, what you want to do is when the pack's starting to get low, there's 5 cards left in the pack. You look at the pack and you're like, do these cards have homes?
Mhm.
And if they do, it's not a problem because not everyone can be on every deck, right? So if you find cards that are not making it into decks commonly, those are the knobs you can tweak. So if Savannah Lions is the last pick, it's so no one's on the mono white aggro. Big whoop. That's to be expected.
I think you mentioned something interesting, something I probably should have mentioned earlier, and that's just cards sitting in sideboards. This isn't like a huge revelation, but a small change that I made a long time ago are cards that frequent or more often end up in sideboards than in your main deck. I just end up cutting it in general. Kind of like Pithing Needle was that card
Pithing
for a
needle's the
long
easiest.
time.
Yeah.
But Sorcerer's Spyglass kind of fixed that problem, similar to like Wilts and Natural Ones. Wilts just having cycling will is more of an incentive to have it in your main deck than just play because I don't ever want to play Naturalize because it's just going to sit in sideboards and come out of sideboards. I'm never excited to play Naturalize, but I'll
Yeah.
always play it with some sort of variant
Yeah.
attached to another card to make it so people play it in the main deck. I very, very rarely will keep cards in that just like Pyroclasm was another good example. I think the card is very good, obviously, and it's good at just hosing the aggro decks. But that's all it ended up being good at. It just sat in sideboards, would come in against the red decks, would help not single handedly beat the red decks. Creatures have gotten a lot better, but cards that just even though they're good, if they just end up in sideboards too often, I just end up cutting them. Which again isn't a huge revelation, but
Yep. I see people
also
posting
affects my
threads
decision.
about recording picks, recording sideboards, looking for those types of holes. So it's a thing that comes up, and it should probably get more spotlight than it does because it's part of the feedback cycle. Like, why didn't you play this card that I added that I think is good, or why is this card that's been in the list for 8 years not being played anymore?
I think Cube is unlike any other format you can play really. Especially if you're the curator, if you're building a cube as opposed to just playing it. If you're trying to build it, there's no, like I said earlier, there's no easy answer. There's never going to be, here's a list. This is the best cube you can play. Everyone's going to love it. The end. You will, you just have to do the homework. There's no shortcutting that part of it, I guess, and
The
that's
the
what
the shortcut you can have is doing your homework, finding out a cube that you like the look of, or you think your play
yeah,
group will like of, copy it, play with it, and then you
and
can
then make
start
adjustments.
making
But you
changes.
still have, yeah, you can. I guess you can shortcut the process where you find a list. And that's generally what Drew and I recommend people is
Yeah,
find a list you like, whether it's a friend of yours, whether it's Moto, whether it's something on someone on the Cube subreddit. Just
proxy
find
it.
it, proxy it, build it, play it with your friends, and then you'll notice pretty quick. And assuming they give you feedback, you'll notice changes you can make for it relatively quickly. But there's no fast answer to like is card A going to be good? My play group this and that. Like, yeah, Questing Beast, like Arizona Focus. Questing Beast is good. It's like probably going to be great, but not everything's a slam dunk. Not everything's super easy. And again, it does require you to kind of do the upkeep, do the homework. You're not just going to like net deck something and it's going to be easy peasy. It does require that dedication that maybe a lot of people don't realize. Hey Drew, I just want to say about my first cube based on your list about 3 years ago, and I could be happy with it. Oh, thanks. Uh,
Thanks, Colonel.
yeah. Do you still
Colonel
play?
Mustard.
Do you still play his list now, or have you updated it since? I'm very curious.
Oh, I hope you updated it. That's the entire reason you springboard off onto someone
Right. No,
else's
I'm just
list.
curious if he like makes us the same updates or
Yeah, that's
just makes
another way to
changes
do it.
himself.
Let me do the heavy lifting. Yeah. If unless you don't like the direction I'm going over the
Yeah.
time.
Well, it's like the Popper Cube I copied was I think from the poppercube.com and then just make changes based on stuff I like, dislike, stuff like that. I haven't played it that much to give a real amount of feedback on it, but I think that's the best starting point. It's the easiest starting point. But I guess just reading their reasonings for changes and cuts versus playing it. Once I played it once, I feel like I got infinite more information than however many articles I read of it. So I was really happy to do that. I've done it many times. Probably some updates. Okay, yeah, it's good. Yeah, getting feedback on your draft is extremely important. And again, I feel for people who don't get feedback, who have to like find some way to get it to kind of get that information out of their players because you're trying to help them. You know what I mean? You're trying to make the experience fun. So it shouldn't ever feel like you're trying to like force someone out of their bubble just to kind of give you their opinion. But outside of that, I don't know if I have anything else to talk about on the subject. This kind of went longer than I thought it would, just kind of like it always does.
I could talk about like the Moto cubes because they're the most front-facing cubes on the internet, right?
Sure.
And they've introduced some new ones this year into the rotation. The last 2 years, they got some Clugs cube. We have the Cultic
Yeah, they
cube.
did
We
a
have
yeah, cube showcase.
Aggros. Yeah,
Okay, so speaking broadly about, let's say, vintage and legacy, and modern, they did eventually, but vintage and legacy were kind of the cubes they pushed for a long time. Um, they didn't feel very different, with the exception of power. A lot of the same philosophies were there. I'm not sure who exactly designs their cube, but part of it is like a showcase of this whatever cards are new, and you can't really get too mad at them, but they do kind of shoehorn in whatever's new.
I guess my intent. I followed the list mostly when they started and up till now, and I think the person who curates it changes over time, as
Mhm.
probably does. And the list that they started off with was very traditional, pretty aggro focused. And I remember the
Oh
great
yeah,
aggro purge of
2000
2011,
whatever it happened, but yeah, they cut all the red
12.
cards because they
Yeah, they,
the red
they
cards
cut
are overperforming.
20 of the top cards in top winningest, and 19 of them were red, mono red aggro, and
Wasn't the last
the
card
20th
Dolphin
one was
Shackles?
Shackles.
Yeah,
And
which is really funny.
so obviously the diehard cubers at the time were best cards, right? And we were like, "What are you doing?" And over time, maybe like 6 years ago, I realized they're cutting cards and designing the cube for their audience, kind of like how we design for ours.
Mhm.
They want streamers, they want big plays, they want people to draft silly decks,
Yeah,
and that's kind of where they want to showcase their new cards, obviously. So that's their design philosophy and why their lists have obvious flaws, but they're not going to fix them because that's their design intentions.
yeah. I think at first, when like you said, when the cubes first got put up, and they start making kind of sweeping changes really fast, especially to cut down the 19 best red cards, which they, I don't want to say never bounce back from, but they've made slowly start adding them back, slowly seeding them back in. Not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah.
Um, at but the other day, it was good for the cube community to get the kind of the format more out there, more people aware of it, more people to play it online. I know it's I've heard a lot of sad stories. People build cubes and then they don't have people to play with, or the friends kind of falls out of favor, whatever the case may be. So that existing as an outlet for people who don't get to do it, or don't have a friend who has a cube, or have their own, or whatever. It's great that that exists. And as weird as some of the decisions they might add to the cube might be, whenever I do play it, I always find myself kind of surprised about how a handful of cards perform, which end up affecting changes I make in the future, which is great. And I think a lot of people, especially the cube designing world, even you and I, you kind of, I don't want to say you fall into a bubble, or your play group does, whatever the case
Definitely
may
do.
be.
Like
But
I
you,
value more your opinion because I know you personally and you own a cube and I know your experience more
mm,
than random guy
yeah. So
who wouldn't.
to get out of that bubble, to get other people's feedback is fantastic. And like the easiest way to do it is to just play it and just try it. So I know I don't actually draft the cube very often. Friends of mine do frequently, and they give me a lot of feedback on stuff. I know you, same friends. So hearing that is great. Being able to try something new is great. Even though the decisions might be weird or feel whatever, it's awesome. And then they started getting a little more gimmicky with like the Grixis cube and the Legends cube, and then they went like the Clug cube, and then they had the cube. It was supposed to be CubeCon during a couple months ago.
Yeah, I
That
think it was
didn't happen
March or April. Yeah.
because of COVID, and a lot of cubes instead got featured on Moto, which the mostly successful. I guess overall was successful. Not everyone, I'm sure, was involved or cared about the nonsense cube drama on the
I
subreddit.
guess to like not to shave off the hard edge on that. I think it may have realized that people who may have only played one type of cube on Moto got experience to several different types of way to design cube and that were drastically different from what they were normal to
Oh, absolutely.
experience. So then people would either relate to that, like it, not like it, and that's what it is, right? It's an environment to try out and to open your horizons, not to
Hmm.
say any design was distasteful or incorrect. It's not something that you personally enjoy.
Well, absolutely, and I think that the the, the last couple of cubes are on there, like the Cultic Cube and the Decorator Cube, were great examples of that. Obviously, they put a ton of love, a ton of care into the playgroup they play with, and they obviously just love, uh, you know, they love the lists to play with. They love the games and the decks that it outputs, and that's fantastic. Again, at the end of the day, I just want everyone to enjoy what they're doing. But obviously, it had a pretty stark contrast to what people, I don't want to say we're traditionally used to, but especially on featured on Moto, we're used to. There was obviously a pretty different parallel, and that went over poorly because again, while you and I talk about this isn't the way I do it or Drew does it is the best way. Everyone does it differently. Everyone's going to enjoy it differently. There is no, like I said, there is no cheat sheet. There's no best way to enjoy a cube, but everyone's going to enjoy it differently. And people, for some reason, the internet, right? People have a hard time just having civil conversations on the internet. So regardless, the I think it was a good experiment. I hope they do it again in the future. I'm really curious how they decide on which cubes to feature. It's something that, while cool, and it would be awesome to have something like that feature, like something of mine featured on there. I've never made an effort once to do that. So I know they've taken submissions in the past, and that's I think how Klug's cube got on, which is awesome.
It was part of a Twitter poll. I'm not sure if they won some kind of contest, but there was 4 options, and I think 2 of the options ended up making it on Moto at some point. I think there was a
Oh, there was a Khan's
cheap.
extended cube. I
Yeah,
remember
there was
that.
that might have been one of them. Yes.
That cube was zany. And even in those kind of weird cubes, you can always find something to enjoy. So
Yep.
again, I'm happy that they did that experiment. I hope they do it more. But do you have anything else you want to talk about, Drew?
I don't think so. I think it's been interesting watching the community grow. Even myself as a cube designer, like this is acceptable. Like, oh, I don't care anymore. I was like, yeah, okay, maybe we could all learn something from this. Just over time, changing my opinion personally, seeing everyone like different philosophies arise over time. Because I've been posting on that. I abandoned Salvation 8 years ago for their one. Let's design the one cube list. And I went to Reddit, and I remember there was under 8 consecutive users at that point, and I was just like posting and posting and posting, and now there's like this is probably over 150, which is not a lot, but
No.
it kind of is. It's Cube, and the community's mindset is just it's just gotten better and more different opinions,
Yeah.
and we could all like rising tide all ships raises all ships, right? So
Right. Like you mentioned, I think when people try to look at Cube as there is just one way to do it. This is the best way to do it. You're probably in for a bad time. You're just like not going to have a pretty healthy conversation with people. And a lot of what you said about salvation, um, I thought it was a huge problem, but there were like a couple figureheads in that community that were very popular. Lists were very popular, and that's great. Like
yeah, it's not
people
that
like what
they
they're doing.
commanded,
No,
like,
not at
do
all.
this. It's that they were so popular that they would voice their opinion, and everyone would change their opinion to that opinion.
Yeah,
So
it kind of became law. So there wasn't a lot of conversation. It was just kind of like, oh, X said Y. Y is the truth. So, um, yeah, some of that. Hopefully, this conversation made sense. Like, it kind of hopefully explains how Drew and I make our decisions. Why I'm I guess when I was cubing more frequently, not so much in 2020, I would try to make changes fairly often. And why we've kind of stray away or embrace certain strategies, certain cards, if that helps. But
yeah,
yeah,
if anyone
hopefully,
has any questions and wants to poke holes in my list, feel free. I'll be the first to tell you when a card sucks, and it might just be in there because I'm waiting for something to be reprinted. It's like a filler card, right? So bring it
yeah.
on.
Drew's got a couple bums. Drew's got a couple tectonic rifts or whatever the hell that card's called in his cube.
Hey, don't,
Couple
it's a
fiddlesticks.
non-aggro red card that it did something one game that I drafted it. It was sweet that game, but it hasn't done anything since. But it was sweet that one game.
Yeah, Drew has a couple interesting ones. But those are the kind of cards that make you interesting. I'm not going to say as a designer that I don't let my biases affect our decisions, because they 100% do, and that's a privilege I get as being the designer, I guess. But anyway, I appreciate you making time for today, Drew. I'm sure we'll find something else to talk about next week or the week after. But yeah, I guess let us know what you thought about this. Again, I always intend to bring it up at the beginning, but we record this live and then I upload it onto YouTube. There are not show notes, sorry. There are timestamps at the bottom, but you'll see that. Try to make it more digestible. This one's only an hour and a half, it's not 2 hours, thankfully. But it's really, I guess, when you're talking on something like this, it's really easy to just kind of talk forever. I know when we were making our old content, it was much more. We have this time frame to do it, just like kind of ram it, make it work. And now we don't have that, so I guess it's good and bad. I guess it makes always seeing how whoever upload hour, 2 hour long videos maybe isn't the best. So maybe I'll start chopping them up. But otherwise, again, thanks Drew. Thanks Drew for hanging out. We'll be back probably next week. And I will be back playing Brawl for a bit. I think play Brawl for a bit, then probably Dead by Daylight. As is tradition. I think rank reset was today. Oh, Amaket remasters came out today. That's news I forgot to talk about. I guess it came out. It's not news anymore.
Is that a draft format?
I don't know. I'm gonna log in Arena and find out.
All right.
Anyway.
I'll slum it in your chat for a while then. So.
All right. So yeah, thanks again, Drew, and I will be back in a second.